Hello my dear students, how are you? I hope you are doing well. So let us start with a new science chapter, class 8th, crop production and management. So are you guys ready with this chapter? Let us see what we are going to study first in this chapter. So first here we'll talk about the introduction part, then we'll discuss about some agriculture practices including some crops, various types of crops like kharif crop and rabi crop. Then we'll discuss about the basic practices of crop protection, the preparation of soil, how we prepare soil for the agriculture for production of crop. Then we'll talk about what implements are used for agriculture practices. We have plow, we have hoe, we have cultivator. Then we'll talk about something sowing, adding manure and fertilizers that increases the neutrality of the soil. Later we'll talk about the irrigation and various methods including the traditional method and the modern method. And finally we'll talk about the protection from weeds, harvesting, it includes the storage, and ultimately what are the food that we obtain from animals. So a huge chapter but very interesting. Let us start this chapter. So we all knows that food is one of the very important condition for human being. We require food for our living. If we do not eat food for long, we cannot survive. So we can say that all living organisms require food. So when we talk about food, here you can say some different food particles, like in terms of the cereals, pulses, in terms of milk product, in terms of juices, in terms of fruits, in terms of vegetables, and even in terms of some food that we obtain from animals in terms of the meat and the flesh. So we know that the food is very important for our living. We cannot survive without food for long. So let us talk about this food. From where do we get this food? So we get the food from two sources. One is from plant and other is from animals. So plants, that means the fruits we eat, vegetables we eat, then cereals, pulses, there are so many things that we get from plant. And from animals, definitely from these animals we get milk. From animals like hen we get egg, we get chicken, we get meat. So different sources we have. Majorly we categorize into plants and animals. Now the ultimate source of energy is sun, and from sun plant synthesize food by the process of photosynthesis. So basically when we say that plants synthesize their food by the process of photosynthesis, and this is the food that actually we absorb or we take from plants, we means animals and human beings. So animals including the man or human being obtain their food from plants. So we get this food from plant, and plant prepare their food by the process of photosynthesis. Now this energy that we obtain from the food, definitely we get energy when we eat food. So this energy that we obtain from food is required to do so many metabolic activities like digestion of food in digestive system, like respiration in respiratory system, like excretion of waste products in excretory system, like circulation in circulatory system. So all metabolic activities require some energy, and we get this energy from food. So now we can say that a huge large population of India, as India is vast country and large population is there. So we need to provide food for such a large population, and thus we need a regular production of food in terms of crop, in terms of agriculture. We need proper management of this food that the farmers actually grow. We need to know how to store the food. Then the distribution. It should be a uniform distribution throughout, so that there should be no scarcity of food and everyone will get sufficient amount of food as required. So let us talk about the agriculture practices, how to begin with the production of food in terms of crops. So we know that early man, how the agriculture practices came into existence. So initially any early man eats some mango or any fruit, and he throw this food, this seed in the area, and finally after a few years, around 3 to 5 years, you can see that this mango tree has grown. So this was the initial basic initiative done by early men by mistake, and there is a production or agriculture practices start that way. So this is about the agriculture practice till 10,000 BC, where people were nomadic and they were wandering here and there. They were moving from one place to another place in groups in search of basically food, and second is shelter. So once they come to know how to grow these plants from the seeds, they ate the raw fruits, they ate vegetables, and they started hunting animals again for food and definitely for shelter also. Later, once they come to know how to cultivate or plant the plants or crops in terms of agriculture, he or the early man started the word agriculture. So basically this is the birth of agriculture in terms of when early men start learning and started doing the cultivate land and produce various types of crops in terms of rice, in terms of wheat and other food crops, and that is the birth of agriculture. This is how the agriculture starts by the early man. And nowadays we are having very advanced technology for this agriculture practices. So I have used the word crop again and again. There might be some question in your mind that what is crop? So when we talk about crop, we say that it is nothing but the plants of same kind that are grown, that are cultivated at one place and on a large scale, and thus we call it as a crop. So crop is nothing but large number of same kind of trees or plants are grown and then cultivated for on a large scale. We call that as crop. And certain examples of crop, you can see the images: wheat, rice, millet. These are some examples, very good examples of crop. So different types of crops. The crop plants in terms of vegetables are produced according to our need. What do we need? If we want more vegetables, if we want more crops, so we grow or farmer grow according to the need. So different crop field, here you can see the images, and different cereals, even fruits, vegetables you can see in these images, and you can come to know, yes, all these we obtain from plants, and they need to be grown with good accuracy so that we can get good amount of these crops, these food items, so that a large population of India can get this amount of food and sufficient amount of food. And thus we require good technology so that we can proceed further for getting large amount of food with limited resources. So there are two types of crop. When we discuss about the crop, we majorly divide into two types of crop. One is the Rabi crop and other is Kharif crop. And here you can see the example of wheat as Rabi crop and rice or paddy as Kharif crop. Now there is a question, what are these types of crops? Let us discuss both these crops one by one. So first we will talk about the Kharif crop. We know that the Kharif crop basically has been sown or started in the month of June to September. That means basically they are sown in rainy season of India. So when we talk about how they are sown, we will discuss when they are sown. So they are sown in the month of June to September. And certain examples of these Kharif crop, peanuts, paddy, we can see soya bean, maize, cotton, all these are examples of Kharif crop. Now let us talk about Rabi crop in detail. Rabi crop basically is grown mainly in winter season, and the time period is from October to March. And the good examples are wheat, pea, mustard, linseed, gram. These are certain examples of Rabi crop. So you need to learn these examples individually for Rabi crop and Kharif crop. Now the thing is, before sowing this Rabi crop, we need to prepare soil. So how the preparation of soil can be done? As you can see in this picture, the farmers are preparing soil in field. And that is the very first step, my dear students, for the preparation of soil, and it includes the development of the condition in soil that promotes best possible growth of the plant best possible growth of that crop, so that we can increase the yield, the quantity can be increased within that limited resource. So the very first step is farmers need to prepare soil in the field, and that can be done by just loosening of these soil particles by digging. So here you can see in this image that they dig and loose the soil particles so that the air can enter into the soil particle and the seeds can be sown very easily. Now, how does this loosening helps? So let us see. When we create a good breathing environment for the roots by loosening soil, because by loosening soil the air particles can easily enter into the soil, and thus the root particles, the roots of the plants or the crops can easily get this air particle. So these air particles allow the root to breathe easily, and thus they grow healthier. Even when they go deep into the soil for roots, still this loosening of soil help to take oxygen, to take air from the soil. Now, this loosened soil is also having one important feature, that it is now responsible for easy growth of microorganisms and those microbes which are the friends of farmers. That means which helps in increasing the neutrality of the soil. And this way, the loosening of soil helps in two ways. One is the roots can breathe easily. Second, the earthworm and the microbes which are good for the cultivation of crop, those microorganisms can easily survive as they get good amount of oxygen from the soil, from this loosened soil. So this digging help in these two ways. Now let us discuss about the next step. After loosening of soil, now the tilling or plowing is very important. The process of loosening and turning of the soil, we call it as tilling or plowing, and this plowing field, here you can see this plowing field is having big clumps of soil, we call it as crumb. Here you can see in this image some big thick crumbs are there, these are nothing we call as crumbs. So once this plowing or tilling has been done, then the leveling has been done by using leveler, and this leveling is useful for sowing the seeds as well as for watering the crops, that means for irrigation. So this leveler is very important, is must, because it is helpful for sowing the seeds, it is helpful for irrigation purpose. Now, what are the tools we use? Before sowing the seed, we need to break these thick soil clumps that we call as crumbs, so that they convert into small particles, and now it is good for better yield of the crops. So the various tools that we are using for breaking those clumps or large pieces of soil, and before sowing of seed, what are the practices that we generally apply? We require plow, we require hoe, we require cultivator. Let us discuss one by one their images and their function. So first we will talk about plow. Plow has been used since ancient times. You must have seen various farmers of our old India, they have been used this plow number of times, and this is the ancient one of the cultivator, or I can say the practice that is used by the farmer. What is its use? It helps in tilling the soil, remove weeds, and also helps in adding fertilizer to the soil. So here you can see, which we call it as hull, also used by farmer. It is made up of wood and it is drawn by a pair of bulls, but not necessary we always use that wood plow. Nowadays we are using iron plow. So here these are very common pictures that you can see in our Indian villages, where farmer is preparing the soil before sowing the seed with the help of this plow. So it is very, very important. It helps in tilling the soil, it helps in removal of weeds, it helps in adding the fertilizers. All these are very important, and plow is very, very important for this process. Let us discuss another tool, that is hoe. When we talk about hoe, we say that it is used in removing weeds and it helps in loosening of the soil. Removing weeds, weeds are some unwanted plants that are required, and loosening of soil, it can be done by hoe. So it is nothing but like plow, it is also pulled by animals. So here you can see this is the image of hoe that is used for removal of weeds and loosening of soil. Next we have is cultivator. When we talk about cultivator, we say that the plowing or tilling is done by the tractor driven cultivator. So basically this tractor driven, or we can say this machine, helps to save the labor as well as time. It is much faster than the manual equipment. So this cultivator, hand driven or machine driven, both are used to plow the field. Though machine driven saves labor and time, so it is most efficient. It is more efficient as compared to the manual cultivator. After this, let us talk about sowing. Sowing means we need to select certain amount of or type of seed, and then we need to place it into the soil. So sowing basically requires, the very first step is selection of seed, because when we are having good quality of seed, then we can sow these seeds very easily in the soil. So very first thing is seed selection is very important before sowing the seed. To get higher yield, we need to select the clean, healthy and good quality seeds so that they can give good amount of crop. Let us see an activity. Take some amount of water and add some wheat seeds into it. Mix it well, and after some time you observe that some wheat particles settle down at the bottom. The water becomes dirty and some particles will float. The particles that float, they are hollow and thus they are damaged. So since they are lighter in weight and thus they floats. Whereas the healthy seeds, they get settled down easily and can be separated from these damaged seeds, and thus we can select the healthy seeds from damaged seeds just by using this activity. Try this activity at home. This is very interesting and you can come to know how we can clean these seeds and how we can separate the healthy seeds from the damaged one. So these healthy seeds are very good for crop protection. Now let us talk about traditional method of sowing. When we talk about traditional method, that means the ancient times, what are the methods that we have used. So it is a traditional tube, here you can see, which has some funnel shape structure from where we can just pass the seeds into it from the top funnel, and it passes through this pipe. Via these pipes, it passes into the soil. So this is one of the traditional way of sowing the seed. It goes further, the farmer takes it and carries it along with it, and sowing seed, passing seed through this funnel shaped structure and passes into the soil, and this is how the sowing has been done traditionally since so many years. So here it is the traditional tool of sowing the seeds. Now next let us talk about the seed drill. That is nothing but the modern tool to sow the seed. So this is, here you can see this image, and this we call as seed drill to sow the seeds. So seeds are sown now uniformly by using, uniformly means because we are having all these tubes with equal distance. So they are sown with equal distance, and thus we say that uniformly at equal distance and equal depth as it is done by machines. So it saves labor, it saves time, and at the same time, since the uniform distribution of seed is there, and thus each plant, each seed will get sufficient amount of sunlight, water and nutrients, and thus they grow well, and thus they result in good quality of crop. So this seed drill, which is the modern way of sowing the seed, is nowadays very important. Some seeds are not sown into the fields, rather than seedlings are sown. That means like for rice, for paddy crops, when we talk about, we cannot grow the seeds for the production. What we require is, we require the seedlings. That means we convert them into small plants, and then these small plants are then roasted and applied into the soil. So they are sown in the form of seedlings, and we call it as paddy crop. After this, once the seeds have been sown, they require nutrients from the soil, and we need to add manures and fertilizers in the form of nutrients. So what are these manures and fertilizers? Basically, these are those substances which, when added to the soil, it increases the neutrality, because they are rich in nutrients, they are rich in minerals. So when we talk about nutrient rich soil, it yields, it always gives us high quality and healthy plants or crops. This is because of the presence of manure and fertilizer. So continuous cultivation of crops, it always decreases. When we grow crop continuously on a fixed field, then it continuously decreases the nutrition of that area of that field. So we need to add nutrients, and we are adding nutrients in the form of manure and fertilizers. So here you can see some examples. Fertilizers are basically the chemical substances prepared in the laboratory or factories, whereas manures are the natural substances. Let us discuss more about this manure and fertilizer in detail. So we talk about manure. Adding manure to soil, it increases the minerals, it increases the nutrients, and we call the process as manuring. So manuring is done just after sowing the seeds, so that we increase the fertility of the soil, so that the plants, the crops, the seeds can get good amount of nutrients from the soil. So manure basically is formed just by the decomposition of animal and plant waste. So it is purely organic or natural substance. Let us talk about fertilizer. When we say fertilizer, they are nothing but the chemicals, but they are very rich in particular nutrient. So use of natural fertilizer is good for environment, but excessive fertilizer always reduces the neutrality, the fertility of the soil, and it pollutes the nearby water bodies when the water passes from the field directly to the water bodies, and thus they are responsible for causing the water pollution. So these fertilizers are good, they are rich in nutrients, but excess always reduces the fertility, excess always causes this water pollution. So what are the advantages of manure? First thing is, it improves the soil texture and water retaining capacity. That means now soil can hold more of the water by adding manure to the soil. It increases some good microbes that we call as the farmer friends in the soil. It makes soil porous so that the air can easily go into the soil, which in turn helps in exchange of gases. It increases number of those friendly microbes or earthworms. It improves the texture of soil. So soil texture has been improved. That is one of the very important advantage of manure. So here you can see the image of manure that can be prepared just by decomposition of animal and plant waste, and they can be added directly without any much precautions. Let us discuss an example to differentiate between manure and fertilizer. Take moong dal, ask your mom to give, soak it for some time, allow it to germinate, and then take 3 glasses of equal size. Once they germinate, take 3 empty glasses, mark them as A, B and C, and then add soil and cow dung in glass 1, that means manure. Add soil and urea in glass B, that is fertilizer, and only soil in C without manure, without fertilizer. And then plant these seeds, so the germinate seed, add 1 in each or few amount of these seeds in all these 3 tumblers. After few days, around 7 to 8, 10 days, we observe that the growth is more in the A and B container where manures and fertilizers have been added, whereas the growth is limited in the C container. So here we can see that the manures and fertilizers are very important for the neutrality of soil, for maintaining the nutrients in the soil, for increasing the fertility of soil, so that we can ultimately get good amount of crops. When we talk about fertilizers, these are the chemicals which are rich in specific nutrients, and they are the synthetic product. Here you can see some examples like urea, ammonium sulfate, potash, etc. And they help in getting the better crop yield because they are very much rich in those specific nutrients. But their excessive use, as we have discussed, decreases the fertility of soil. So it should be used with some limitations, and at the same time its water, when passed into water bodies, causes water pollution also. So here we can see certain examples like wheat, paddy, maize, they are good images. Here you can see, and we get the good amount of this crop by adding fertilizers into the soil for these crops. So we get better yield, better amount and good quality of these crops by adding fertilizers, as they are very much rich in those nutrients that are required by such crops. Now, when we talk about fertilizers in detail, we say that addition of organic manure helps in maintaining the fertility of soil. The soil fertility can also be maintained by leaving the field uncultivated for some time. That means between two crops, leave some space unfertilized, uncultivated, so that the fertility can be increased. Here the crop rotation is one of the method. That means in one season we grow one crop, in another season we grow another crop. So just by rotating different crops, we observe that the fertility has been maintained. It is very much helpful in replenishing the soil and maintains its fertility. For example, what farmers do, they used to grow legumes and wheat alternatively. That means in one season they grow legumes, in another season they grow wheat. What will happen? In roots of leguminous plant that they grow in one season, say legumes, ribosium bacteria is present in those roots. And this ribosium bacteria is very good in converting atmospheric nitrogen into the usable form, and thus soil can get good amount of nitrogen using these bacteria. So in next season, when the farmer grow crop, it would be easy to take nitrogen from the soil. So here is the difference between fertilizers and manure, as we have discussed. So fertilizer, we say that it is man-made inorganic substance, whereas manure is natural substance and it is obtained just by the decomposition of animal and plant waste. Fertilizer is prepared in factories, manure can be prepared only in fields just by decomposition. They do not provide any humus to the soil, whereas manure is very much good in this and it is providing large amount of humus to the soil. Fertilizer is very rich in plant nutrients, a specific amount like nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, whereas manure is not so good or so rich in plant nutrients. So now let us start with the next topic, that is irrigation. Irrigation is nothing watering the plants, watering the crops. So basically it is nothing but the supply of water to crops at regular intervals from time to time. We call the process as irrigation. So the time and frequency of irrigation is very important. It always varies from crop to crop. It always varies from soil to soil, and it varies from season to season. So we need to be careful while planting, while watering plants, their time, the frequency, as it is different for crops, for time, for season, for soil. So we need to be very careful while watering the plants. So let us more discuss about the irrigation, why it is important, why it is required. So very first thing is, without water, the agriculture practices cannot be even think of. When we talk about the irrigation, we say that water is supplied to crops at different intervals, and we call that process as irrigation. And water is, now we can say, the very important requirement or the necessity, not only for plants but for animals. That means for all living organisms. Plants, we know that contain 90% of water. We can say that water is essential not only for seed germination in plants, as well as it is absorbed by the roots, and then with the help of xylems it can transport to each and every part of the plant. Minerals, nutrients and fertilizers, they are dissolved in water and then only they get absorbed by the soil and then thus passed it to each and every part of the plants. Water is very much required by the absorbing nutrients from roots, passing to each and every part of the plant. Water protects plant from frost and hot air currents also, and thus the plants can even survive in the very scorching heat of summer. Frequency of irrigation, as we have discussed, depends on soil, depends on crop, depends on season, depends on time. So how long and how number of times we have to repeat this irrigation, that depends on all these factors. What are the sources of irrigation? So when we talk about the sources, we have well, we have river, we have dams, we have tube wells. All these are good sources of irrigation. That means basically the water bodies are actually required for irrigation process. There are some other sources like canals, like lakes, like pond. They are also necessary. They are also important. So these are certain sources of irrigation. Initially, the traditional methods that used by farmers for irrigation. Here you can see the pulley system. Here you can see the chain pump, animals, wools, wells, etc. So water is lifted from different sources in the form of wells or canals, and they are carried to the field by humans or by cattle by any means. For water lifting, pump are used which works with the help of solar energy, so that water can lift the water from the water body and then transfer it to the field. So it can be used, it can run these machines or these pumps with the help of solar energy, with the help of biogas, diesels, electricity, so many sources of this energy helpful for taking the water and passes it to the field. So when we talk about or compare the traditional method with the new method, we observe the modern method, we observe that the traditional methods though are low in cost, but they are time consuming and thus less efficient as compared to modern methods. So what are the modern methods? One, very important, sprinkler system. You must have seen in your nearby garden also this is sprinkler system, which is useful for uneven land. At the same time, where the water supply is very less, it is useful in those areas. This system has many pipelines to which small pipes are attached at regular intervals, from where the water sprinkles and the crops can grow, just like raining. So it is useful for plants and especially coffee plantation, where this sprinkler system is very much helpful. After this, we will talk about drip system. We call it as drip irrigation, and you must have seen this type of drips and these types of canals in the form of drips. In this system, water directly reach roots in the form of drops. So water goes into the soil drop by drop, and it is useful for fruits, for garden, for trees, and it is very much saving a large amount of water also. So we call it as water saving technique because water is not wasted at all. This water directly goes into the soil in limited amount as the plant require, as the requirement of that crop. And it is good for land with less water availability. So here is the image for drip system. Now there is one more problem with the farmer, weeds. Weeds are nothing but the unwanted plants. And if unwanted plants will grow along with the crops, the main problem is these weeds basically reduces or absorbing the nutrient from the soil, and there is a now competition of the crop with these weeds. So whatever be the nutrients, the water we add for our crops, it actually has been absorbed by these weeds. So we need to remove these weeds. So how a farmer protect its crop from weeds? Let us discuss. So what are weeds? These are undesirable plants that grow naturally along with the crops. You must have seen in the garden also some small plants, unwanted plants that you have not grown and they come up. The removal of weed is called weeding. Weeds. Why this removal is important? As I have told you that it competes with crop for water, for nutrient, for soil, and thus definitely the growth of crop has been reduced if we do not remove weed. So it affects the growth of crop plants. So their removal is very much necessary to get good yield of this crop or good quality of crop. So some weeds are poisonous even for humans and animals, and thus the removal of weed is very important. Even sometimes we use some chemicals for the removal of weed, and we call these chemicals as weedicides. Now tilling help in weeding. That means if we select one weed one by one and remove it manually, we call it as tilling. Before weeds produce flowers and seeds, they should be removed. Weeding can be done manually just by tilling with the help of khurpi or with the help of seed drill also. So these weeds has to be removed before the production of their flower or seeds. Otherwise what will happen? These weeds start growing number of weeds again and again. So we need to remove these weeds with the help of manual or khurpi or seed drills. Weedicides, as I have told you, the chemicals which are used to kill the weeds directly in the field. So, these are the chemicals that directly sprayed in the field, and they are only there to kill only the weeds and do not affect crops at all. And the common example is 2,4-D. They do not harm main crop. Weedicides are harmful for humans because these are chemicals. So, when we intake these weedicides or these chemicals, it may cause hazardous diseases. And at the same time, even while spraying, here you can see the farmer has covered their faces. So, a person has to cover his face so that the chemical may not directly enter into the body of the person. Let us talk about harvesting. Harvesting is nothing. Once the crop has been grown, we need to cut the crop once it matures. So, after their maturation, the cutting of crop is required, and this process is known as harvesting. It can be done just by pulling out these crop plants one by one, or it should be cut near close to the ground. It is done either manually when we are doing by hand, or it can be done with the help of harvesters. What will happen after harvesting? Some stubs are left which are later burned by the farmer. However, it causes pollution. It should not be done, but very limited sources are available where to throw these substances. So, anyhow, farmer has to burn these stubs which are the substances, the particles that are left after harvesting. So, here you can see the image of the harvester and crop harvesting. Let us move further and discuss about threshing. Threshing is nothing about the machine. Here you can see thresher. Basically, the grain seed which is being prepared or separated from chaff from the harvested crop. That means once you harvest the crop or cut the crop, you need to separate the seed from its waste chaff, which we call it as chilka of that seed. So, basically this process is called threshing. Threshing is carried out by this thresher machine, and we call it as combine also. We call it as harvester. Winnowing. So, once this chaff has been removed from the seed, now it is another method of separating grain from chaff when limited amount of chaff has been introduced or remain in the grain. So, farmers of a small field basically use this winnowing method just for removing this chaff from grain. As the grain is heavier, chaff is lighter, so it can be easily removed just passing this seed from this machine. We call it as winnowing machine. Now, once we separate the seed from the chaff, important thing is it's a storage. And we need to be very careful of the storage of these crops, because it should be stored safe so that it should not be spoiled by any insect, rats, microorganisms, or even moisture. All these particles, all these substances, all these factors actually harm seed. So, basically the harvested grain which have some moisture, before storing in the storage bins, they need to be placed or dried in sun so that the moisture has been driven out. Storing them without drying may spoil these seeds and can easily be attacked by microbes, because microbes can grow well in moist area. For example, dried neem leaves can be stored for longer time in these wheat grains at home. So, we generally store these wheat grains by adding some dried neem leaves or any such medicinal leaves which does not allow the microbes to grow. So, this storage is one of the important steps, because on small scale the storage has to be done so that it can be taken to the market easily. On small scale, storage is done in jute bags. Here you can see these bags, jute bags, and metallic bins also. On large scale, it is done in silos and granaries which protect them from pests, rats, insects, other microbes, even from moisture. And specific chemical treatment are also applied for such big godowns to protect these grains from these factors. So, after this discussion about the food we obtain from plant, we have discussed about the agriculture practices, the crop production. Now, my question is, what type of food that you obtain, that you get from animals? So here I have given one example to you. We get milk from cow, from buffalo, from she goat, from she chemical, and there are some other animals also from where we can get milk. What are the other milk products or food that we obtain from animals? Like plants, there are animals that are also source of food from humans. We eat egg, we take milk products, we take paneer, we take cheese. All these are nothing but the food obtained from animals directly or indirectly. So animal rearing at home like cows and buffaloes or in farms involves proper care of these animals. We need to be very careful while handling these animals, and they are provided with very good or proper food and shelter so that they can be free from the disease. And on large scale we call it as animal husbandry. So animal husbandry is basically the rearing of animals on large scale. So now your answer is, your turn is to write the food products that we obtain from animals and what are the sources of those food products. So with this slide I am going to end this chapter. Thank you so much.